The pen tool is probably one of the most famous tools in Illustrator, and if you've ever used Illustrator before, you probably learned to use the pen tool almost immediately. We've saved it for quite a long time because I think it's important that you learn how to build imagery with shapes before you learn how to use the pen tool. Honestly, if you can build something with shapes, you might as well do that. The pen tool really is kind of like a last resort because of its inaccuracies and some other problems. Now the pen tool is right over here. You might select it, and then probably if you've ever used it before, you click, and maybe you click and drag, and it draws out these handles, and you drop another point and click and drag, and get some kind of funky shapes going on, and click and drag, and hopefully you get back to your starting spot and you've drawn a shape. Now this is fine. There's some problems here, right? It's kind of a jagged edge. If we just look real closely, right, it comes to a point and then it kind of is a little harsh. So it can definitely be a tricky tool to master, and the way that I think is best to learn the pen tool and use the pen tool is in a very mathematical way, at least to start. Once you get good at it, you can use it to draw more organic shapes, but we're going to use it to draw some simple curves that would be impossible to draw otherwise. So I'm going to start by turning on my grid, which is right here, and I'm going to turn on Grid Snap. Now this is the grid that we set up in the last tutorial. You can go to Illustrator, Preferences, Guides and Grid. It's a 500 by 500 document, so I have a grid line every 50 pixels and 10 subdivisions. Okay. So I'm going to use the darker lines as sort of my guide and the littler lines as just snapping points. I'm going to grab my pen tool. And the pen tool by default, whenever you start, has this little asterisk next to it. That means that you're starting a new line. I'm going to click to drop a point there. And as I move the pen tool around, it's snapping to all these different grid points. So if I click again, it's drawn a straight line, click, straight line, click, straight line, and then whenever I reach my initial starting point, it gives me a little circle, and whenever I click, it finishes that shape. Now the shape is good to go. We can still add curves to it. We can still do all the kind of basic modifications you can do to any other live shape. Just going to zoom out and drop that shape up in the corner. Let's grab our pen tool again and zoom in. Now, if you've ever used the pen tool before, like I said, you might try and draw a circle or something like that. So I'd click and drag, and then they try to draw a circle shape, and they run into all these issues, and it can be really difficult, and you end up with something crazy like this. Okay, this is not what we're going to do. Again, we're going to use it in a very mathematical way. So instead of dropping a point and then drawing the next point, I'm going to undo that and undo that. I'm going to click and drag, and these two handlebars come out. Now these handlebars are control points that control the curve of the line that we're making. So if I drag this up to this point, I'm going to just drop it here. Whenever I release, the next point that I draw is curved based on this point that we've dropped. So we dropped this control point here, and as I move this line around, it's based on that curve. So if I drag this out to here and click, it's now drawn a nice smooth curve starting here, using this control point as our curve modifier, and then drawing the curve to this point. Okay, so now our next line can be straight. I'll click. And then let's say we want to get another curvy line. Now it's very common for people to click and drag out lines, and that might work, but let's do it a little bit differently. Instead of immediately going and dropping our next point, we can click and drag a control point out of this line. So instead of going on to the next line, I've just clicked and dragged. I'm going to drag this point out to right here, release, and notice as I draw my next point, it's taking that curve into account, and I can drop it. Perfect. Let's do the same thing here. So instead of clicking my next point, I'm going to click back on the point I just drew, and click and drag out another line. Drop. I'm going to do a straight line, and then let's do our final line here. Click and drag out a line, and connect it back to our original spot. Now this is really how you use the pen tool, this very kind of mathematical, more structured way of dragging out these control points and not doing it all willy-nilly. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command Y, And we can see that it's drawn this really nice, smooth pill shape that we have. Now I can come back in here and still grab these control points. So if I have this selected, I can come back in with my direct selection tool, grab each one of these points and modify them and play around with them and see what kind of shape I can build out of this shape. We're going to get to that in a future video. For now, I'm just going to focus on the pen tool. Let's draw a kind of puzzle shape using what we just learned. I'm going to drop a point. I'm going to draw a hard corner here, so I'm clicking once. I'm going to draw another hard corner here. Now I'm going to click back on this point, draw out a control point, drop, clicking again, drawing out a control point, drop, and draw another hard point, drag out a control point in this direction, drop that, drag out a control point in this direction, drop that. If I want to easily move around this, by the way, I can hold down spacebar and click to move around with the hand tool. I'm going to drop this corner, drag out a point here, drop, drag out a point here. It's not quite snapping to the bottom of my document. That's okay. Drop a point here, point there, drag, drop, drag, drop. Okay, great. Again, all this is still live. I can still come in here and edit these things. I can change each point. So yeah. All right, let's go ahead and do like a sawtooth pattern. So I'm going to select my pen tool again. I'm going to click. I'm going to start by doing a straight line. I want to have a curve from here to here, so I'm going to just draw out a point there, drop. Okay. Now I immediately want to go into the next straight line, so I'm just going to click right there, draw out the control point, drop. Let's do the opposite down this direction. Now typically I don't like to use the pen tool to modify existing points, but one important thing is if you do make a mistake, so let's say I click here, I can always go back and remove this point by simply clicking on it. There's other functions in the pen tool. For instance, if I hold down Command, I can grab points individually and move them around. This is great for doing like live editing stuff, but in general I like to do all of that afterwards. So I'll drag out a point here. All right, so that's a little bit more funky. Those are the basics of the pen tool. The pen tool is this great organic drawer, but really I recommend that you learn it using a guide like this, using a grid, and just try drawing certain shapes. Try thinking, okay, I want to draw a circle. How do I do that? And just set out drawing a circle. You're going to learn how to modify these paths later, but for now just focus on drawing good, clean shapes with the pen tool.